Last I checked, 3 comes after 2, right? So after the second Vanguard set, we've got the third set, right? Wrong! We received set 6, Breaker of Limits. This set led to a pivotal moment in Vanguard's history, as it gave a unique experience in the English format, led the groundwork for our first ever World Championships, and introduced us to the limit break mechanic that we would be seeing for many sets to come. However, maybe you have no idea what I'm going on about? No sweat, I'll bring you up to speed. There doesn't seem to be an official reason for releasing set 6 in English after set 2. It's often speculated that Bushiroad would want to close the gap between releases for Japan and the rest of the world. The general community belief, however, is that Bushiroad wanted to switch up and balance the metagame for the English format, as sets 3 and 5 introduced decks that dominated this metagame for a long time. These will become to be known as the Big 3. We'll be discussing that Big 3 in future videos. The products we'll be talking about today introduce new clans and mechanics, but Bushiroad seemed to make a very targeted effort to make players play one clan in particular introduced in this set, Gold Paladin. They were the box cover art for set 6. They were featured as one of the 2 trial decks used by the main character in the anime for a long period of time. Received a huge wave of support in this booster set and in the first ever extra booster in the English format, Cavalry of Black Steel. Extra boosters are basically what they are named, additional booster sets. They're typically released between main sets with a smaller set list and focus, as well as supporting fewer clans. This extra booster also had its release window pushed ahead in order to release alongside this set, in order to further support Gold Paladins. In general, this was a very successful period for Vanguard as a whole. When researching for this video, it was really interesting to hear how excited people were for Vanguard at this time. There was just an overall feeling that Vanguard could potentially surpass and overcome the Big 3 card games of the time. Some players even mentioned that their locals grew to the point that they had to rent out extra spaces to accommodate more players. We'll actually be covering all of these products in today's video, starting with these trial decks. Trial Deck 5 Slash of Silver Wolf for Gold Paladin and Trial Deck 6 Resonance of Thunder Dragon for Narukami were released on May 12, 2012. But what did end up happening to Trial Deck 3 and 4? Bushiroad skipped 3 and 4 featuring Nova Grappler and Oracle Think Tank for now. We did eventually receive those trial decks later on, but more on that in a future video. Trial Deck 5 Slash of Silver Wolf introduced Gold Paladin as a new clan. For those who are unfamiliar, Gold Paladin is very closely related to Royal Paladin. It similarly has the ability to swarm the field with units. However, Gold Paladin did this by searching the top few cards of the deck, instead of the entire deck like Royal Paladin typically did. The other new clan they introduced was Narukami in the Trial Deck 6 Resonance of Thunder Dragon. Narukami was closely related to the Kagero clan, but had a bit of an identity crisis at the start. It didn't have a defining mechanic or game plan when it was first introduced, but in later history videos, you'll see how this clan evolved into a much more cohesive clan over time. You might have noticed that both trial decks feature Aichi and Kai again. That's because they were the clans used by them in the anime for this new anime season. I won't give any details to prevent spoilers, but Gold Paladin and Narukami will be the main focus for a while. The trial decks also introduce a new mechanic, Limit Break. Limit Break looked like this on cards. To activate Limit Break, you needed to have the same or more cards in your damage zone as the number written on the symbol, which was usually 4 or 5. Limit Break unlocked powerful abilities. However, because of the cost of having 4 to 5 cards in your damage zone, you could only activate these abilities later in the game. This also meant if you healed and ended up with less damage, or your opponent kept you at only 3 damage, you would not be able to access this ability. We'll be talking about Limit Break a lot in this video and for many videos to come, as this will be the main mechanic cards and decks will revolve around for a while. So let's quickly talk about the 2 main cards in the trial decks and their limit breaks. Great Silver Wolf Garmor was the main card for Gold Paladin and Thunder Break Dragon was the main card for Narukami. They both had the same limit break ability that was to simply give the unit 5000 power when it attacked a Vanguard. Even though it was simple, 5000 power during this point in Vanguard was a great power boost and could make a huge difference. There isn't much else to say about these trial decks, as most of the cards in these decks weren't useful, although some cards did see some play, which we'll talk about soon. This has nothing to do with limit break, but fun fact about Garmor, it was the very first errata card in Vanguard history. Very early copies of this card in a trial deck actually refer to the concept of a deck as a library. This wording was never used again and was corrected in future printings. So, how were these decks received by the community? Some players felt that there wasn't anything really special about these two trial decks. They thought the trial decks were pretty light. For example, they didn't come with any PGs. If you remember from my previous videos, PGs were pretty expensive during this time, going from $15 to $20 each, maybe even more. They also only had one copy of the main boss unit and a vanilla starting Vanguard. Overall, the Gold Paladin trial deck was a more popular trial deck, but there were still players that loved the Thunderbreak Dragon. Moving on to the next booster set in the timeline, Breaker of Limits Set 6 was released in English worldwide on May 19th, 2012. This is one of the rare times in Vanguard's history where the booster set had an almost simultaneous worldwide release. While we got the set in May, Japan got it a few weeks earlier on April 28th, 2012. Up until that point, we were about 8 to 9 months behind Japan's release schedule. I wasn't playing at this time, but heard that many players were eager for sets 3 and 4 to come out. Like we do today, they followed what was happening overseas and got a preview of the crazy support some decks were about to receive. At that time, it was a big surprise to English players when Bushiroad was like, actually, we're gonna give everyone set 6 instead. And it was a huge letdown for those that were looking forward to those sets that were skipped. But once players learned what we were getting for the upcoming release, it generated a lot of hype and excitement. This set also changed how packs work. Now, every pack always included at least one trigger unit. This decision might have been to support the move towards decks using cards and triggers from one single clan, instead of mixed matching clans like we've been seeing up until now. We'll slowly start to see the game evolve to what we know it today, starting from here. Let's spend some time talking about the clans in this set. The 5 clans supported in this set were Nova Grappler, Grand Blue, and 3 new clans, Gold Paladin, Narukami, and Angel Feather. Starting off with Angel Feather, they received 30 cards from this set, which is pretty amazing, because up until this time, new clans only received 4 cards. Angel Feather focused on manipulating the cards in your damage zone, which I'll get into more detail later on. The key cards for Angel Feather in this set included both no-CLs, as they worked really well with Angel Feather's main mechanic and would see play for many sets to come. They also received their own triggers, such as 2 different critical and stand triggers, a draw trigger, and a special heal trigger with the Forerunner ability. This Forerunner ability allowed the trigger to be called to rear circle after being ridden upon, and could also be placed back into the deck after boosting. Essentially, you could use this trigger as your starting Vanguard and have a way to put it back into your deck. You still could only place 16 triggers in your deck total, including the starting Vanguard, but it was an interesting set of abilities on trigger units that only appeared on a total of 5 cards and haven't been done ever again. Some more highlights for Angel Feather. Not only did they get their own Limit Break unit in Circle Saw Curio and a Mega Blast unit in Mobile Hospital Feather Palace this set, but they also received a set of Ride Chain cards. Ride Chain was introduced in the sets that English skipped, so this is the first time English players would get these types of cards. Ride Chain cards had effects that were only activated when you rode a specific grade 1 over a grade 0, a specific grade 2 over a specific grade 1, and a specific grade 3 over a specific grade 2, and also had effects that could help you get the cards to continue the chain. This should start to sound a little familiar because it's kind of a progression from the Superior Ride we talked about in previous videos, or more importantly, you can think of it as an early version of the Ride deck that we currently have in Standard. We'll talk about Ride Chain a little bit more in future videos in the sets that were skipped, 3, 4, and 5. Next up we have Gold Paladin. Gold Paladin was very hot in this set along with Angel Feather. They made their first main set debut with a total of 23 cards, including 2 reprints from the trial deck and 3 promo cards exclusive to the English version of this set. Gold Paladin received a stand and critical trigger, a Mega Blast unit, as well as their own PG. They also received a countercharger in Trip, Calamity Mage. A countercharger is a card with the ability to flip up one of the cards in your damage zone. This meant you can use that card to counterblast again. Players used to call these cards with this type of an effect on flippers. Gold Paladin's main game plan could be best explained by the card Werent, who could call the top card of the deck to field mid-battle, superior calling blindly. They kinda just took what they could grab. The key cards for Gold Paladin, including the triple rare on the box art, Incandescent Blonde Ezel, who could similarly call from the top of the deck through their limit break, as well as a perfect guard in Hollow Shield Mark. Gold Paladin was one of the first decks to exclusively play the max number of PGs, 4, in their competitive builds. Before moving to the other 3 clans, I want to take a moment to discuss promo packs, since I just mentioned the Gold Paladin promos. The English version for set 6 ended up being slightly different from the Japanese version. Bushiroad decided to add 11 cards from Japanese promo packs in the English release of set 6. This meant that the English set had a total of 113 cards, compared to Japan's 102. For those that aren't familiar, promo packs are packs of exclusive cards given out at participating tournament stores to tournament players, winners, or even both. Japan had been receiving these promo packs regularly, so they were pretty ahead of us when it came to promos. In English, we didn't start getting promo packs until April 2012, so a month before set 6 release. This was assuming your store signed up for these packs, received them in time, or even knew about these promos in the first place. The first English promo packs came with 1 random card out of 3 different possible cards, which were Knight of Endurance Lucan from Gold Paladin, Dragon Undead Skull Dragon, and King Seahorse from Grand Blue. These promos weren't as strong and sought out as they are today, for example, where a single promo can save a deck or provide it support missing from main releases. Grand Blue, however, did see some use with the Undead Skull Dragon, as it could return from the drop to the field. The 11 cards that were promos in Japan and included in this set were mostly clones, or cards with the same effect as other cards in a different clan or clans, which is something that has evolved over time into the cycle cards that we received today. For example, in the 11 additional cards we got Turborizer, which has the same effect as Battle Riser. There was Greedshade from Grand Blue with the same attack and effect as Covenant Knight Randolph from Royal Paladin, and very similar to the Kung Fu Kid Bolta from Nova Grappler. Kungal from Royal Paladin has the same effect as Rock the Wall from Dark Regulars and other cards with the same effect. Battle Flag Knight Laldine had the same effect as the Blazer Idols from Bermuda Triangle, but as a grade 2. Satellite Fall Dragon from Gold Paladin had the same effect as many other cards, like the Dead Charge Dragon from Narukami in this same 11 we're talking about. Bright Lance Dragoon from Narukami had the same effect as the Dragon Armored Knight from Kagero, who's actually in the extra booster we'll be discussing later on. Rising Phoenix with the same effect as the Lock Bird from OTT we discussed in the previous video. And finally, Muscle Hercules from Nova Grappler, who was a grade 3 version of the Hungry Dumpty and Claydol mechanic from set 1, also in Nova Grappler. Finally, we reached the last card, Cup Brawler from Nova Grappler, who is not exactly a clone and had a more specific effect, getting 1000 power when one of your Nova Grappler rear guards was rested, while Cup Brawler was the Vanguard. Outside of a few cases, the majority of these cards didn't see widespread play, but I still want to take some time to highlight them, as this was the first time that English and Japanese booster sets were actually different. Coming back to the clans, up next we have Narukami, which had some hype this set, probably from Kagero players of the previous set that were left wondering about the Jijins with strange effects they received in the trial deck. Narukami, similar to Gold Paladin, received a total of 23 cards, 2 reprints from the trial deck, 3 promo cards exclusive to the English version of this set. Much like their counterpart, Narukami also received a standing critical trigger, Mega Blast unit, as well as their own PG. They also received a countercharger in Garuda, and some interesting cards in the Desert Gunners and Indra. The Desert Gunners allowed units to lose the ability to intercept for a turn, while Indra was a Vanguard that gained criticals when it attacked if there were more copies of it on the field. At this point, Narukami did not have much of an identity in terms of gameplay, but was supposed to be a close relative to Kagura. Key cards for Narukami in this set included the face of the clan for some time, Gigantic Kaiser Vermilion, who can attack the entire front row in one swing, and Dread Scythe, which was a Burning Dragon clone for Narukami. Nova Grappler received a sprinkle of support this set. They originally only received a total of 8 cards in the Japanese version of this set, but thanks to 4 promos in the English version of this set, they got a total of 12 cards. Unfortunately, the only notable one of these was the Beast Deity Azure Dragon, which would become the deck's main boss card for a while, and included the 3 new Beast Deity support cards that would help search Azure Dragon through battle and could withstand one of your units. Through Beast Deities, we would see the beginning of archetypes forming in Vanguard. Archetypes in card games are sets of cards with a certain theme that share a similar phrase in their name. They typically provide support only to cards within their own archetype and not to any others. Eventually, this will be referred to as sub-clans in the context of Vanguard. The last clan supported in this set, Grand Blue, was a big winner, receiving a total of 25 cards. Grand Blue also received 1 promo in this set in Greed Shade, a card that sees play even to this very day. Except it's in its updated retrain from V-Series and not this version. Grand Blue received a strong wave of support for this set as it received a full suite of triggers and 2 new ways to Superior Ride. This gave Grand Blue a total of 3 ways to Superior Ride. The Superior Rides introduced in this set all focused on riding from the drop zone. Deadly Swordmaster was a strange update from the Spirit Exceed we talked about last set, as it had 11,000 attack, 1,000 attack more than Exceed, while having the clause that it would lose 2,000 power if you had any non-Grand Blue cards on your field. This ability was placed on many of the 11,000 grade 3s at the time. Swordmaster required a grade 1 and grade 2 that could both return from your drop zone at the cost of Soul Blast 2 for each, and retiring one of your Grand Blue units. This was a much easier cost to play compared to the Samurai Spirit of Exceed that required Counter Blast 1. However, Swordmaster was similar to Exceed in that they both had no other main effect other than Superior Riding. The other Superior Ride was actually a ride chain for the clan's new Vanguard with Limit Break in Cocytus. The grade 1 and grade 2 both have the skill to ride a specific card with a grade higher than it from your drop zone. But one of the biggest cards to come out of this set for Grand Blue was the new starter, grade 0, Captain Nightkid. Nightkid had the ability to counterblast 1, put itself into Soul, and allow the player to look up the top 10 cards of the deck, put 1 Grand Blue card from among them into the drop. This was insanely pivotal for Grand Blue to get their pieces in play, out of the deck, and into the drop ASAP. Key cards for Grand Blue included the new Cocytus, the Battle Phase Extender Thanatos, and finally their unflipper 3-star Chef Pietro. While players continued using their decks from clans that were not supported in this set, due to the power of the Limit Break ability, many players started building decks from this set. Let's finally go over them. As I mentioned prior, this set was one of Vanguard's highest points in terms of popularity, but it was also in terms of accessibility. While local game stores were stocking the product, for the first time in the game's history, there was also Vanguard product available in Walmart. This was huge, as Walmart is a massive box retail chain that sells pretty much everything from lawn furniture to chicken breasts to windshield wipers for your car. Local game stores are sometimes few and far between, and most people typically never have a reason to go into one. But Walmart? Millions of people go there for their everyday needs. Because of this high product availability, new trial decks, and the first ever Cardfight Vanguard World Championships, there is a lot of deck profiles and data from here on out. We'll go over Angel Feather first. Angel Feather was a solid deck at launch. I mentioned it before, but Angel Feather cards focused on manipulating the cards in your damage zone. The clan had several cards that let you change cards in your damage zone by allowing you to put cards into your damage zone or add cards from your damage zone to your hand or field. This allowed Angel Feather to naturally unflip or countercharge really easily as a result of early cards not specifying if you needed to put cards into your damage zone face down. For example, you could use either Battle Cupid No Ciel or Love Machine Gun No Ciel's skill to put a card from your hand into the damage zone, which could be placed face up as it did not specify to put it face down. Then you could grab a card from your damage zone, add it to your hand, typically grabbing a card that you already counterblasted or that was face down. We actually have two different lists to go over today. The first one we'll go over is this one. This one focuses on the ride chain that we learned about earlier and their boss, RAWR. RAWR is the grade 3 of the ride chain and had two abilities, none of which were locked behind Limit Break actually. First, it gained a continuous 1000 power if you had the grade 2 of the ride chain in your soul. Then, the second skill allowed it to counterblast 2, discard a copy of itself from your hand to heal 1 damage, but only work if its attack hit a Vanguard. This type of skill will actually later on be referred to as Persona Blast, when you have to discard a copy of the same card from your hand in order to activate a skill. This was pretty massive because, as you know, you'd lose the game if you hit 6 damage in your damage zone or ran out of cards in your deck. So this is the first time a deck had the ability to heal on command. This, in combination with the Sunny Smile Angel that could put itself back into the deck, meant that Angel Feather could heal itself multiple times in one game. Opponents might even have to deal 7 to 10 damage to an Angel Feather opponent on the regular through the course of the game. The main focus of this deck was to hit your ride chain targets every ride, as both the grade 1 and grade 2 allowed you to place cards in your damage zone with cards in your hand. This allowed your damage zone to work as a second hand, as any triggers, units, PGs added to that zone can be placed back into your hand. You might have noticed that this deck has purely Angel Feather cards and no other clan present. That is because many cards required you to select specific cards from the Angel Feather clan for effects. We'll start seeing more cards enforcing clan specific and even name specific cards for effects way more than we did in the previous two sets coming further. The main game plan here was to outlast and out-resource your opponent, using cards like the Armamos to draw, Nociels to unflip to get cards, and the Barbiel and the Bethanol to make up for the lack of power. The second list we have focuses on the clan's first Limit Break unit, Curiel. While Curiel was played as a backup in the Argdeal decks, some players did not like the possibility of missing the ride chain and focused on her exclusively. Here's a sample list. As you can see, the lists are rather similar, with the ride chain cards being replaced with other cards in the set, such as the Janelle as a backup grade 3 and the Million and 1000 Ray Pegasus units. The Ray Pegasus units were grade 1 and grade 2s with the same ability to get an additional 2k power when a card is put into your damage zone. So it meant that it could gain power every single time a card was put into your damage zone, including damage checks, and whenever you place cards in your damage zone through abilities. As a quick side note, this is different from the if keyword, which would only activate a single time. This type of wording causes confusion for new and experienced players alike, even to this day. I believe it might be in part to Yu-Gi-Oh! Having a reverse desire of which keyword to have for effects. The when effects are not great in Yu-Gi-Oh! As they can miss time and not activate at all. Whereas in Vanguard, when effects are great because they can trigger multiple times as long as the unit with that ability is present for that condition. Some players use Lightning Charger and Clutch Angel to gain even more power, as Charger could gain power if it boosted Curiel and Clutch gained power if you had more damage than your opponent. Finally, Curiel had two abilities. Its Limit Break was the same as Garmor in that it would get an extra 5k power when it was attacking Vanguard, but it had another ability that allowed it to counterblast 1 and call out a card from your damage zone, then replace it with a card from the top of your deck. This, however, actually specified that you must put that card face down into your damage zone. If it did not, this effect would essentially have no cost, as you could just select the card that you counterblasted and replace it with the card from the top of your deck face up. This specific build was more offensive than the Urgirl build, but still benefited from the resource gain that Angel Feather could provide. In terms of competitive use, Angel Feather was a much slower defensive deck at this point in time that lacked the power output due to many of the cards having a weaker attack to compensate for their powerful effects. It also heavily relied on RNG at this point, as there were no ways to get specific cards from your deck into damage zone, so you were at the mercy of your checks. Narukami was one of the other popular decks from this era, mostly because the trial deck was a cheap way for players to build their deck. Here's a sample Narukami list. Narukami right now has a bit of a lack of identity when it comes to playstyle. The main Vanguard from this set, Vermilion, was an 11k Vanguard with a Limit Break ability that allowed it to counter blast 3 and attack all of the units in the opposing player's front row. However, given the high cost of this skill and it being restricted to limit break, it was used at most once per game. Players could use Garuda, the unflipper in this set, to countercharge and possibly use the skill once more. Gigantic Kaiser Vermilion could either be used as a finisher to end off the game with its limit break, or players could just sit on it with its 11k body when they didn't see the Thunderbreak Dragon to use its limit break to swing in for 15k. Players made use of the Hex Cannon Wyvern as well as the Photon Bomber Wyvern, which are grade 2s and grade 1s that gained power if your opponent had 3 or more damage. Your opponent getting more damage was obviously beneficial to you, but during this era you had to be careful giving damage because players wanted to be at 4 damage to activate their limit break. So a common strategy that was developed was limit break denial, or commonly known as counterblast or damage denial. This is the act of not attacking an opponent's vanguard after a certain point, if they are at 3 damage or have no face-up cards in their damage zone. This would hinder your opponent's actions next turn, and you can continue the strategy until you had the means to survive their limit break turn or flat out beat them in that same turn. While I don't think this strategy was widely used or needed during this time just yet, these wyverns work against that strategy actually. They would benefit from pushing your opponent to 3 damage as quickly as possible and could be used in the other anti-limit break strategy of this time, which was just beat your opponent as quick as you could. These strategies will come up a lot in the future, especially when we get much stronger limit break effects. The rest of the deck were cards with power gaining effects, such as Dragon Dancer Rayleigh, who could be an 11,000 booster when boosting the Thunderbreak Dragon specifically, but no concrete mechanic to center the deck around it like Angel Feather. Now Kami did it right during this time in terms of competitive use, as it had a good power output and access to cards that can reduce the opponent's field presence, very similar to how Cowgirl has been doing for the previous 2 sets. I mentioned that Nova Grapplers didn't receive as much support as the other clans in this set, but that didn't stop the clan from seeing play during the first World Championship series later that year. I actually have some lists from those competitive events that we can look at today. Here is the Nova Grappler list from the 2012 Mexico World Championship Qualifier. First runner-up, Jose Henriquez list. This list focused on the new Beast Deity archetype. These cards focus on restanding their own units that share the Beast Deity name. We only received 4 Beast Deities in this set, 2 of which had the effects to search out the main grade 3 of the deck, Beast Deity Assured Dragon. Beast Deity Assured Dragon could discard a copy of itself from your hand or perform a Persona Blast after hitting a Vanguard to stand 2 of your rear guards. This could allow you to get a total of 5 attacks in a single turn. This list was very aggressive as they played a total of 8 stands, meaning each drive check could result in extra attacks, even as early as turn 1. Nova Grapplers could use their aggression to overwhelm the opponent with their offensive quantity, however not in offensive quality. Nova Grappler continues to not have especially powerful units to restand and had to play even weaker cards than normal units, with the Beast Deities as the grade 1 and grade 2 were 6,000 and 8,000 respectively. This made the main targets for Assure's restand come to the cards from set 1. Brutal Jack, whose restraint required Counterblast 1 each turn to allow it to attack, and King of Sword, which was a 10,000 power grade 2 with no effect. That said, Assured Dragon restanding units and playing multiple stand triggers meant that this deck had the potential of restanding 4 of your units in a single battle if you checked 2 stand triggers. Next, we can talk about Gold Paladin. I won't go into too much detail right now, since we'll go over another list with upgrades once I talk about the extra booster set, Cavalry of Black Steel. Here's the list using only cards from the trial deck and set 6. This list is inspired by the winning list from the 2012 German World Championship Qualifier, the champion Christopher Fernau. Christopher's list here includes a few cards that were from future sets, so I substituted them as best as I could. The key card of the deck being Incandescent Line Blonde Ezel from the cover art, and the grade 0 Crip. Ezel's limit break allowed him to counterblast 2 and look at the top card of your deck. If this card was a Gold Paladin, you could call this card out onto one of your rear circles. Then Ezel would get that called unit's power until the end of the turn. While this skill was locked to limit break, you could end up using this more than once per turn if you had the counterblast. This meant you can very easily fill up your front row with 2 attackers for that turn. Ezel also had a similar effect to Alfred in that it gained 1,000 power for each Gold Paladin rearguard you had on the board. This meant Ezel was a massive vanguard that was very difficult to guard. Just a quick side note, but Ezo was one of the cards that saw a huge upgrade in Vanguard Zero, a mobile iteration of Vanguard. The mobile version allowed you to use Ezo's Limit Break for Counterblast 1, and look at the top 4 cards to call 1 Gold Paladin. I wonder how much the game would have changed if the mobile version's effect was the original Ezo's effect. Well, anyways, back to the deck list. Crypt allowed Ezo to appear as soon as turn 2, as it was an improved version of the ride skip cards we have discussed before. Crypt was a grade 0 with the Forerunner ability, and if your Vanguard was a specific grade 2, Balemane, and your field had a specific grade 1, Garrett, you could put both Crypt and Garrett into the soul to ride from your deck. This skip ride has no cost, and unlike the current standard iteration of Ezo, you could do this with 0 restrictions. This allowed you to easily ride into your grade 3 and have access to Twin Drive and grade 3s a turn earlier, and only needing to worry about finding 2 cards instead of 3 cards like the previous ride skip cards. Gatling Claw Dragon from set 2, as well as the new Narukami card, Lizard Soldier Saishin from this set, were a very good counter to Ezo skip ride, as they could snipe Crypt before it could use its effect to skip right into Ezo. However, Ezo players could avoid attacking to not give the other player the needed counterblast to use these skills. Similar to Angel Feather, Gold Paladin requires specifically a Gold Paladin unit, so there are no other cards from other clans used in these decks. Ezo's Counterblast could be refunded with a grade 2 Gold Paladin unit, Calamity Mage Trip, who could unflip or countercharge if its attack hit a Vanguard. The backup Vanguard in this list was Gaara from the trial deck. While its Limit Break and on-place abilities were simple, and in many players' opinion, overlooked at first, players eventually learned that Counterblast 2 to call any grade 2 or less Gold Paladin from your deck is pretty good, compared to Counterblast 2 to call whatever the top card of your deck is. Gold Paladin was very prevalent in this metagame, even before the extra booster. The ability to skip ride into a grade 3 is very powerful, not to mention being able to do this so easily thanks to Crypt. This, coupled with Ezo being a massive, almost unguardable Vanguard swing without a PG, made the deck relatively strong. The clan was naturally popular to it being played by the protagonist in the anime, but also because of the trial deck being as easy as it could be to get into Vanguard. You can possibly blame Ezo and possibly the Spectral Duke Dragon that we'll talk about later on as to the reason why PG started being played at maximum copies, as the majority of these attacks required so many cards for you to guard that it became way more optimal to just use the PG at a cost of only 2 cards to perfectly guard the attack. The last deck we will discuss from set 6 is Grand Blue. Grand Blue received a pretty good boost this set that gave it some solid options. However, this would end up being the last time Grand Blue was supported outside of promos until the middle of 2014, where Grand Blue received 7 new cards in a booster set. A total of 713 days later. The list we'll be going over is actually from the Los Angeles World Championship Qualifiers in 2012 from the champion Donald Buckley. One of the things I've noticed while researching this video was that players were unclear on rules, so you would see a lot of players trying to play 5 or 6 heal triggers when you were only allowed to play a total of 4. There was also a lot of very young players at this time. In the past, you would see many kids upload their deck profiles to YouTube using their shaky cam footage, while in the present, you'd be hard pressed to find anyone under 18, maybe even under 23 playing Vanguard. Donald's list focused on the 2 new superior rides introduced in the set, Swordmaster and Cocytus, along with their respective grade 1s and grade 2s. This list also had a super aggressive trigger lineup, using all 3 of the available critical triggers for Grand Blue for a total of 12 criticals and finally 4 heal triggers. This list is actually capable of playing all of the 3 superior rides in Grand Blue, as 2 of the 3 pieces for Spirit Exceed are present in this list. However, Spirit Exceed himself is not. Swordmaster, as previously mentioned, has no skill other than superior riding, similar to the Spirit Exceed. Cocytus was similar to Garmor and crucial in that its limit break was to just get 5k power when attacking a Vanguard. However, it had the powerful skill to counterblast 2 and call a card from the drop zone. The ride chain for Cocytus allowed you to ride the next grade of the ride chain from your drop at the beginning of the ride phase. You could use cards like Rune Shade from set 2 to try and fill up your drop, as she would send 2 cards from the top of your deck to the drop on attack. You could also use the skill of the starter, Captain Nightkid, to counterblast 1, put itself into Soul, to select a card from the top 10 of your deck to put into the drop zone. Lastly, there was also Choppy the Ghosty from set 2 that could put any card from your deck into the drop zone if you use Choppy to guard an attack. Because of all these abilities, Granblue had no problem consistently riding each turn, as well as thinning out the deck to basically only check triggers and PGs, which would run at 4 copies by the way. Dancing Cutlass was a card I didn't go into detail last set. Previously, Cutlass would be used with Baskirk, as Baskirk would soul charge 1 each turn and Cutlass could soul blast 2 on place to draw 1 card. You could continue to do this with this deck, even using it to empty out your soul from your Swordmaster pieces. The Swordmaster grade 1 and grade 2 each allowed you to soul blast 2 and retire a Granblue rearguard to call themselves out from the drop zone. Granblue was a very solid deck that could be played in a couple of different ways. The multiple superiorize allowed the deck to consistently get into its wide targets. However, this came at the cost of Granblue's consistency, probably even to this day, getting it closer and closer to decking out from putting many cards from deck to drop. One of the cards strangely missing from this list is the RAWR Battle Phase Extender, Deathseeker Thanatos. This was a grade 3 from the set that could counterblast 1 to retire itself after its attack hit a Vanguard to call a card from your drop. This allowed Granblue to call out a card mid-battle, leading to an extra attack. You could use this to swap into a grade 2 that could actually intercept, like the special intercepts we talked about last time. Wish I could find out why I wasn't playing, but this winning list won without it. The importance of Breaker of Limits set 6 cannot be overstated, especially when it comes to the English format. It was not only released in a time where Vanguard was expanding in popularity and helped expand that popularity, but it also helped develop the game into what it is now. Not only did we see the introduction of Limit Break and also any of these strategies that were developed thanks to this mechanic, we also started to see the sort of direction of decks going towards building with only one clan in mind, separating out the other additional cards that were played in the past. All this happened here while Breaker of Limits was coming out. As I mentioned earlier, there was a set, an extra booster that was released to supplement this set in the Cavalry of Black Steel, which I was actually originally going to include in this video, but decided to give it its own video because of the runtime of this video. So next time, we'll take a look at Cavalry of Black Steel and the incoming dawn of the Spectral Duke Dragon. Till then, take care of yourselves and each other. Play Vanguard and have yourselves a damn good one.